Working as a real estate photographer. I've seen plenty of toys and women's underwear, lots of weed laying around, and kids skipping school to bang or get high. But one incident in particular sticks out. I wouldn't call it disturbing, but totally weird. The client was a very wealthy and beautiful woman, and had a very nice home, with tasteful nude photos of her around the house. Her and her husband were home while I was shooting, and I asked the woman if I could remove her pink robe, which was hanging on the shower door. She replied, "Feel free to put it on." Her response caught me off guard, but I just moved it aside. So I keep moving through the house to shoot, and I told her I was about to wrap up, but needed to photograph her walk-in closet. To which she replied, "Try on anything you want." I ignored her offer for the second time, finished the shoot, and left. Just an overall very, very weird day. Guy was friends with my now ex-husband. Flew into town to interview for a job. I got stuck picking him up from the airport, because ex-husband was working nights. He insisted we had to stop at Sonic on the way home, because he would flunk the interview the next day, without a drink from there. We get home, and I show him the guest room and guest bathroom. He tells me he needs to watch some TV to wind down before bed. I hand him the remote to the one in the living room and go to bed. I wake up several times throughout the night, due to the loud noise. He was watching war movies with the volume all the way up. I get up in the morning and walk into my living room. That has been completely rearranged. He moved every piece of my living room furniture to a new spot. When he comes out of the guest room to take a shower and get ready for his interview, he tells me the room, and I quote, "flows so much better now," and that he watches a lot of HTVARs, so he knows how to decorate. Then, just before he leaves for the interview in an Uber, he tells me he really doesn't like the shampoo in my guest bath, and I should get something better for visitors. I have no clue what he's going on about, so I look after he leaves. Flea and tick shampoo was the only bottle in the shower, left after my dog's last bath, and clearly marked as such. He used flea and tick shampoo and then got mad at me for it. He bombed his interview. My ex-husband took him back to the airport, and I never saw the guy again. Guess the Sonic didn't work after all. Last year, in London, Wimbledon Tube Station. I'm listening to music with my earphones in. A song I listened to in a playlist I heard 100 times before. As I'm waiting for my train, I hear the speakers in the station, the ones that say, "Mind the platform." But instead, I hear something along the lines of, "Evacuate the station immediately. A bomb is now going to detonate." Immediately started to panic and sprint towards the exit. As I look around, no one else seems to have noticed at all. So I stop before going up the stairs. Everyone looks completely indifferent. Proceeded to get on my train and go to work. Still have no idea how to explain that experience. I'm certain it didn't come from my earphones, so it's a bit worrying that I possibly hallucinated that. Friend of mine worked for an upscale concierge chauffeur service. His most memorable moment came when he lost Marie Osman. Fairly simple gig: go to airport and pick up Marie Osman, who is to be the featured entertainer at a private event. Plane comes in, he meets her. She has a carry-on bag, but her checked suitcase, containing her stage dresses and makeup, is missing. She is unflappable though. Asks to be taken to the nearest upscale mall. He does as instructed. She goes into a large upscale department store, selects 2 long sequined cocktail dresses, and goes to the fitting room to try them on, without him, of course. Unfortunately, there are 2 entrances and exits to the fitting room, and she exits out through the other side. She cannot find my chauffeur buddy, who is waiting patiently on the side she'd entered. 20 minutes passes. He thinks something has gone wrong. So he grabs a female manager and asks her to go into the fitting rooms and ask for Marie Osmond. The manager thinks she is being pranked and declines. Chauffeur Buddy is in mini panic mode now, running wildly around the store, asking random customers, "Have you seen Marie Osmond? Have you seen Marie Osmond?" Store security is summoned, and he is asked to leave the premises immediately. He calls his employer and tells them he has lost Marie Osmond. The employer doesn't have her cell phone number, but has her agent's number. The agent is not accepting calls. She has in the meantime taken a cab to the gig, thinking she has been forgotten. Eventually, lots of explaining and apologies ensued, and there were no repercussions. High school days. My friend used to caddy at a local country club. One guy really liked him and asked if he could drive him around while he went out partying. This was in 2003 and in a pretty rural area. My friend agreed. He picked the guy up at like 8 p.m. right off the bat. The guy handed him $200. He went to a bar for a little bit. My friend sat in the car. The guy came out, handed him another $200, and told him he had to visit his friend real quick. He went and got a bunch of coke. They went to another bar. He handed my friend another $100 and told him to look out the window and turn up the radio. He then blew several lines. He came out a couple hours later with a girl. He was married with kids. He handed my friend another $20, and they went back to her house. After the guy had sex with her, he came out and asked to be taken to the beach. By then, it was like 2 in the morning. My friend said that the guy slowly walked around the beach, went into the water in his shoes, threw a bunch of rocks into the water, then sat in the sand for about 45 minutes. He came back to the car and asked to be driven home. When they got out of the car, he hugged my friend and gave him $500 and asked him to never tell anyone what happened. None of us really believed my friend when this happened, until the guy he drove got arrested like 6 months later for assault and possession of cocaine. When I was around 13, I was in my room getting dressed. I leaned over and felt a splat on my back. Put my hand there and it comes back covered in blood. I'm disturbed. I can't find any sort of source, but I clean it off and continue to clothe myself. Next time I lean over, I feel it again. I now freak out and search my ceiling and anything that might have had a red substance on or around it. Room is spotless. I told myself it wasn't blood and instead was some art material, but it quickly browned, as blood does. To anyone thinking it was a scab, a spot, or a bug, it wasn't like normal blood. It was kind of gel-like and coagulated, and there was a good grape-sized amount of it, both times. Checked myself in the mirror pretty well too. Haunts me to this day. When I worked as a painter, I painted a girl's room one time, while she laid in bed and played on her phone and took naps. When she opened the door for me, and I came in with her to the room, I expected her to leave. But she just laid back down. It was very strange. The strangest, most inexplicable thing that's ever happened to me happened only a few months ago. I was briefly working a job at a college bookstore, where one of my tasks was to call customers that had ordered books that were out of stock, and let them know we had received their books. I'd already called a large number of customers that day. I had the process figured out. You either called and got an answer, where you had a script to tell them about their book, or you got the answering machine and had a slightly different script to give. Simple enough. Until I called one number and got neither. Just silence. It threw me off a little, and I just hung up after a few seconds. I called back again. This time, heard what sounded like someone picking up and quietly listening. But for some reason, I held my tongue and just listened too. I could hear sounds, like people faintly talking in the background. Then, I heard a quiet, "Hey, how can I help you today?" A man responded something along the lines of, "I need to pick up my book." I was confused for a split second until my coworker, standing near me behind our desk, suddenly says, "Hey, how can I help you today?" She's speaking to a customer, a man, who tells her, "I need to pick up my book." Suddenly, I get goosebumps. I listen for a few moments more. On the line, I hear their conversation, but about a second before it happens, I hang up, walk out from behind the desk, and say to my coworkers, "I'm going on my break." My break consisted largely of me sitting at a table outside and silently wondering what had happened. Did I see into the future, but only for a split second? My grandma was always irrationally afraid of dogs. She liked them, but they made her nervous. They were too messy, loud, and unpredictable. She would always tell us not to leave the door open on nice days. Close that door. A big black dog might walk in. She had this fear that one day, she'd turn around, and there'd be a big black Labrador slobbering on her floors. We always laughed at her oddly specific fear. We knew everyone who lived nearby, and their dogs. The biggest, blackest dog within 1 mile of her house was a Chihuahua, so her fear was unfounded. Years later, my grandma passed away. My dad and I had the sad task of clearing out her house. Things were a bit stuffy, so we left the door open to the yard and got to work. After a while, we suddenly hear a strange noise and turn around. And there was a big, black Labrador sitting in the middle of the kitchen, just gazing up at us happily, drooling on Grandma's linoleum, just like she always said would happen. We started uncontrollably laughing, crying just a little, gave the dog a treat, and escorted him back outside. She just had to be proven right one last time. Love you, Grandma. One time at age 11, I was trying to open an orange, and I couldn't, so I went to my mom to open it. I hear fast typing on the mechanical keyboard that our family desktop had. So I walk to where the computer is, and my mom isn't there. I look around the house, and after looking for a few minutes, I remember that she has been out running errands. Strange. So later that day, I'm walking up the stairs of my house, and I hear the typing again, but it cuts out when I walk towards the room with the computer. And yet again, my mom isn't there typing. For reference, my dad types at a speed of 1 character per 20 seconds, so it could have only been my mom. And until we got rid of that computer and keyboard, I would occasionally hear typing on it. Also at night, every now and then, the floorboards creak and pop, as if someone is walking on it, even though there's no one up and walking. Looking back now, I think I missed the opportunity to leave the computer on, with just a blank notepad 24/7. Just to see what it would type. I used to work as a handyman. One time, was called to a block sink at a lady's house. So I get to the door and she opens it. And the house was like Dolores Umbridge's office. Every wall, shelf, and horizontal surface was covered in decorative plates, figurines, teapots, and stuff. The hallway was exactly me, and one plumbing toolbox wide, between occasional tables and shelves, with more stuff on them. That was the most nervous, slowest walk I made through anyone's house, trying not to knock anything over. She was friendly enough and made tea. But even then, I had to turn around slowly and be careful to not bump anything or knock anything over. So I had just finished physical education at school and was walking to my next class. I had a habit of getting changed early, so no one was around at all. As I was walking, a basketball dropped out of nowhere in front of me. It bounced directly up and down until I grabbed it. The college balls always had WC written in black marker on them, but this one didn't. It looked brand new, no marks whatsoever, and was in traditional style. What confused me the most is how it appeared seemingly out of thin air. No one was around. There are no rooftops around to allow the ball to fall if it were to be lodged in somewhere. I looked everywhere to see where it might have come from. But the fact it was bouncing like someone had dropped it at their feet makes it even weirder. When I was about 5 years old, I was playing in my room, which had thick, blue carpet, wall to wall. I was sitting near my closet, on the floor, playing with some stuffed animals, when I heard some low growling and barking. I looked around, and noticed what looked like dog teeth, coming up through the carpet fibers. It was just the teeth, nothing else, and they were opening and closing, with the vicious dog noises it was making. It's incredibly difficult to describe exactly how it looked and sounded, but it was there. I remember being absolutely terrified, and staring at it for a moment, before running out of my room, and yelling for my mom. When I finally dragged her back into my room, there was nothing there. It never happened again, but it's one of my earliest and most distinct memories. I'm 30 now, so this was a long time ago, and it's very possible my memory could have exaggerated, or even added to what I think happened. I asked my mom if she remembers this happening, and she does remember me running out of my room and trying to explain what I saw. So it wasn't a dream, which was my first assumption. I still think about it from time to time, and still can't figure it out. There was one time I went camping with two of my buddies. Neither of them are outdoorsy kind of guys. I was just kind of getting them into the whole camping or hunting scene. So I took the two friends out there and got 2 miles from camp when they suddenly just wanted to go back. I said fine, showed them where to go on my phone, and made them put a waypoint on the other little GPS thing I had to follow. I wanted to keep going, so I did so by myself. They wanted the pistol I had on me for safety reasons, leaving me to walk alone in the forest, with water and nothing else. No big deal, I thought. I found a steep hillside, with rocks all the way down when I was about 5 miles from camp, and decided to go down. I followed the path at the bottom of this thing, which was at this point just a dry riverbed. I walked down, and it got steeper as I went further south. When I crossed a certain point, something just felt wrong. I started looking around for anything. But there was a huge log across the 2 hillsides, and when I crouched down to crawl under it, it felt like I was being watched. I looked up to my left, saw nothing, looked around to see if there was anything in the middle of the riverbed, then looked up to the right. Huge black canine. Too small to be a bear, but it looked like a wolf on steroids. That dog creature and I held glances for what felt like hours. But I know it couldn't have been more than 10 seconds. Every passing moment made the feeling of dread worse. I moved backwards to get the hell out of there, and when I moved the wolf thing just booked it into the forest, further from camp. The walk back was eerie. It didn't feel as much as I was being watched as to just the feeling of, it will catch me eventually. And that's why I don't ever hike alone anymore. Used to live in a colonial house in Wharton. Very old house which had been renovated throughout the years. Besides the basement, It was basically just a giant dirt tomb down there. No floors, walls, just dirt everywhere. I was in 3rd grade, and my whole family would work in the morning. Besides my mother, who was a stay-at-home seamstress, a couple of mornings, while waiting for the school bus with my mom, we would hear a bounce sound from below in the basement. Along with the bouncing, we would hear a faint giggle or laugh from what sounded like an older woman. It would last a couple of minutes, a couple of laughs, and that sound those kickballs make when you bounce them. This freaked me out, but my mom, used to paranormal activity she experienced in the old country, just brushed it off. She told me one thing I always think of whenever I feel the creeps. If there's a ghost or being, they're lonely or in search of something or someone. Let them be in peace, and acknowledge them. And if it's a good one, it will go away or show you something before they move on. Later on, I found out that an older tenant died in that house from natural causes. And she used to be a nanny who loved to play with kids. There's a guy who rides a motorized bicycle through my neighborhood, dressed like a circus ringmaster. It has been going on for 6 weeks now. Not a motorcycle or a moped, a bicycle with pedals with a 2-stroke engine attached. Goes around 29 meters per hour. It is loud. I can hear him coming for a few minutes, so at least 2 miles of sound carry. Black tailcoat, top hat, puffy white shirt, scarlet vest, maroon and gold vertically striped slacks. One time I saw him check the time on a gold pocket watch. Another, he puffed on a corn cob pipe. Every morning at 7:15, he is headed north. Every night at 9:45 south. 7 days a week. I think, where is he going dressed like that with such punctuality? Surely nowhere around here would allow him to dress like that. And he has no backpack, pannier, or other means of transporting a wardrobe change. He must work 3rd shift, south of town, from 10 to 7. That's 8 hours and an hour lunch, but 7 days a week? I tried following him at night, because I assumed he was heading to work, and following him home would have been creepier than the already super creepy following to work. I had to do it in a car because, like I said, he can book it on that motorized bike. I lost him in 2 turns. He runs stop signs, I don't. The next night, I was waiting in my car, ready to go. I had The More You Ignore, The Closer I Get by Morrissey queued up. He was late, super late, rounding 10 p.m. now. Then I see his flashy white headlight. He must have run out of gas. He is pedaling, but I was so amped I tried anyway. He was moving at around 6 or 7 meters per hour. I couldn't stay behind him, but I know my every route in, out, and throughout my neighborhood. I've lived here for 21 years and run 3 times a week, so I'm like an atlas of this block. I lost him at around 5 turns. To be fair, he saw me about 8 times. He may have gotten scared I was stalking him, probably because I was. But last night, I followed him the whole time. He was back to motor power and ran every stop sign and red light. He can't lose me now. This is it. I will finally know, after 6 weeks. Anyways, he works at Walmart. My mother had me and my brother very young. She was a single mom and didn't have a car. We used to all hitchhike to the next town over to see my grandma. I was 4 and my brother was 2, and we would both stand on the on-ramps with our little thumbs out. Truckers would mostly pick us up. My girlfriend is anaphylactic, and it is triggered by a chemical called salicylate, which is found in pretty much every food. When she was in high school, she had her first big reaction, and the school nurses refused to administer her adrenaline shot until the ambulance got there. Now, obviously, Having an anaphylactic reaction doesn't give you a lot of waiting time, so by the time the ambulance got to her school, she was in pretty bad shape and barely conscious. The paramedics immediately administered one of her EpiPens and loaded her into the ambulance as her mother arrived. She continued to fade, so they gave her a direct injection of adrenaline this time. Still nothing. They give her a second direct injection of adrenaline, and this time it hits her about 30 seconds later, all at once, and her heart fails. She stops breathing, no pulse, nothing, dead to the world. For about 2 minutes and 46 seconds, she was clinically dead. And the scariest thing is, she saw nothing. She tells me that when you are losing consciousness, you can't tell the difference between waves of drowsiness and when your body actually shuts down. All she saw was the darkness of her eyelids, and it felt like going into an extremely calm sleep, where she couldn't hear or feel anything, and she didn't mind it, all despite the fact her mother and the paramedics were screaming at her to keep her eyes open, and the ambulance was flying towards the hospital. She miraculously just came back to life almost 3 minutes later, as they were giving her chest compressions. And the cardiologist that assessed her later stated that all the adrenaline in her body was enough to not only stop her heart, but to also restart it, with the little help from the paramedic pumping it around. But still, to this day, she can't differentiate falling asleep after a long day and dying. In the mid-2000s, my younger siblings, mother, and then stepfather were on a program in the UK called Mums on Strike. The premise of the show was that the mother would be sick of doing everything around the house and would be whisked away to a luxury spa for a weekend, leaving the clueless father in charge of trying to take care of the household duties. A lot of the conversations and scenarios were faked. I supposedly visited them for the weekend, but I did multiple different shoots across a few hours on the last day of filming, then went back home. They'd cause fights between the siblings by purposely creating situations where one was favored over the other, so the others would throw a tantrum. There was a shoot on location in our local town center, and they encouraged my little brother to run off into all sorts of different shops, causing choas as my stepfather tried chasing after him with 2 other children in town. Mealtimes were a bit of a farce as well as it was a weekend. My stepfather had to cook a traditional roast dinner. The production company intentionally supplied incorrect ingredients to make sure my stepfather looked like an idiot. They filmed my reaction to him trying to add beans to the roast a few different times, so they could pick the best one. In the end, after they got all the footage they wanted, they sent one of the production team out to the chippy to get us some actual edible food. In conclusion, a lot of reality TV is contrived, exaggerated, sometimes faked, and full of drama. My wife and I moved into our house in the summer of 2019. Neighbors warned us about the people renting the house directly behind ours. Apparently, they had been known to cause trouble and blow things out of proportion, bordering on paranoia of everyone around them. We kept it in mind, but had no issues for the first 6 months after moving in. Their house sits on a hill behind ours, so it overlooks the majority of our backyard due to the elevation change. Well, one night, at about 3 a.m., we wake up to ring notifs from our phones, showing video from our front doorbell. There's a man standing barefoot in a sleeveless shirt on our porch, pounding on our front door. We give it 2 minutes just watching him on the app, thinking he's drunk and has the wrong house, essentially giving him the benefit of the doubt. But then we start to hear him say, "Come out, I'm gonna beat you up," and cursing up a storm. He leaves the porch, and starts to head around the side of the house towards our backyard. Considering we had no idea who this was, my wife immediately calls the police as I move out of our bedroom towards the external doors to watch out for any attempt of home invasion. At this point, our neighbors directly behind us throw a huge spotlight into our backyard from theirs. We're thinking they know something is up and are trying to help us out by shedding light on our backyard. The cops arrive several minutes later and knock, we explain. They head out back to look around and get the scoop from the neighbors. It turns out that the spotlight neighbor was the one on our porch. He had jumped our fence into our backyard and up into his yard, and then turned the light on. He told the police that several nights prior, I had let my puppy out into my own backyard in the middle of the night, and because I was in my boxers, that I was trying to expose myself to his family, because they could look down on our entire yard from where theirs sits. He then followed this up to the police with evidence, which consisted of videos he had taken through our windows of my wife and I inside of our own home, doing totally normal things like chores, watching TV, etc. Nothing inappropriate or scandalous. Not that it would have mattered anyway, we were in our own home. Because of the elevation difference, if they went out of their way, they could technically slightly see through our closed blinds due to the angle, so they had been filming us for no reason at all, and expected the police to see this as reasonable. The cops came back in and my wife was devastated. A huge breach of our privacy, of course, and totally unfounded accusations, as we had never done anything to anger these people. We hadn't even met them. The police told us, just don't worry about it. If he tries something again, just give us a call, which wasn't the most comforting at the time. They moved out a few months later without additional issues. My wife and I celebrated like it was a holiday. I was living alone on a fairly quiet backstreet of a larger city. One night, I was in bed and heard a woman screaming outside. Really screaming, a raw, blood-curdling, gut-wrenching scream. Like she was fearing for her life. It happened a couple of times, so I went to look out the window. I was on the 5th floor of a large apartment building. I looked around to see if other people were showing concern or looking out of their windows, but nothing. It happened again and sounded like it was coming from directly beneath my window. There was a small enclosed car parked there, but it was dark. I shone my phone's flashlight down there, but couldn't see anything. I thought about calling the police, then it happened again, loudly, and I made a split-second decision to rush down there. I ran down there as quick as I could, already partially regretting the decision. I crept around to the rear of the building, where the scream was coming from. It happened once more. I shouted, "Hey," as loud and intimidating as I could. Nothing. I was terrified. My heart was beating out of my chest. Adrenaline pumped. Hands were shaking. I couldn't see anything. I put the flashlight on my phone and shone it around. Nothing. Then, 2 foxes darted out from behind one of the cars. I watched them scurry off down the street with a wave of relief, thinking, it can't have been that. I looked around a little more, and then went back up to my apartment and got on Google. And yes, it was foxes. I had no idea, but the sound that foxes make when having sex or fighting or whatever they were doing sounds like witches being burned at the stake. And it's a horrifying thing to hear if you don't know what it is, especially in the middle of the night. A middle-aged woman drugged me, and I probably almost ended up as a gimp in her basement. I was driving home through back roads I had never been on, and came across a bookstore in a tiny town in the woods. The bookstore was actually a house, where the front of the home had been converted into a store. There was a box on the porch that said, 50 books. So I stopped to see if there were any Stephen King books in there. Middle-aged woman comes out with a huge smile and gives me a bowl of fruit and some tea. I'm like, this place is awesome, and rifle through books while eating the fruit and drinking the tea. So I spent some more time in there. She brought me more tea. Even when I said, that's plenty, she kept refilling. Gave me dessert too, brownies and cookies. I didn't realize it at the time, but she was drugging me. It's hazy to remember the details, but at some point, she closed the shop, telling me to take my time looking at the books. She told me that she was going to go take a shower and was gone for a while. When I was ready to pay, I had to wander through her house to find her. I found her in her bedroom. She was in bed. I'm pretty sure she was naked. At the time, I thought, weird, she's watching an exercise video in bed, but later realized she was watching porn. You might think this is hot, but it isn't. She was my mom's age, and had been telling me how I reminded her of her kids in college. I told her I was ready to pay, and she told me how to open the register, so I went and opened it, put in what I thought I owed, took out the change, and left. When I stumbled outside, a fire engine drove by, screaming with sirens. In the distance was the glow of a big forest fire, and the stars were being covered by smoke. A tall man on a horse watched the fire truck pass. He looked right at me, took a piece of wood or something out of his mouth, and said, "Town's burnin'." I swear to God, I have a crystal clear memory of this happening, even though I'm sure it couldn't have. By this point, I guess I was seriously tripping balls on something. I'm not a drug guy, so I don't know what I had, but I was out of my mind and could hardly walk. I got back in my car and drove home along twisting roads on tall cliffs above the ocean. Twice, I realized I was on the wrong side of the road. One of the times, I realized this because a massive truck was headed straight for me, laying on the horn and flashing its lights. I kept thinking about how my car could be like an airplane and a submarine if I drove it off the cliff. I can't believe I made it home alive. Later, realized I was in that house for about 4 hours looking at books. At least that's what I hoped to hell I was doing. To set the stage, I lived in a rented home with my mother and brother. We had moved in about a month earlier, and all of us hadn't really enjoyed the transition from our last house. This house was always cold, and the water took a long time to get hot. The walls and floors creaked, and the doors were difficult to open and close properly. I thought it was terrible, but I was only 10, so what the hell do I know, right? We first noticed that our living room furniture would sometimes be out of place, especially one of our love seats. For whatever reason, sometimes in the morning or after we got back from the store or school, it would be moved a few feet out, away from the wall, making it immediately noticeable when you re-enter the house. Also, the blinds in the master bedroom would never stay the way you left them. If you closed them, then when you got back, they were open, and vice versa. About a month into living here, the doorknob for the door that separated our living room from the entryway had the little tightening screw fall out, making it really easy to accidentally pull one side of the doorknob off as you were trying to open the door. The entryway light bulb went out and needed to be replaced, but as it was about 10 feet in the air, my mother and brother didn't feel like replacing it, as they were both pretty busy most of the time. My friends and I loved hanging out in my house on the weekends, as we would have the whole house to ourselves. On this particular Saturday, we were sitting around my dining room table playing a game, when we all hear the doorknob of the entryway door fall off and hit the floor. This had happened a couple of times at this point, so I wasn't initially scared in any way. I sigh and explain what the noise was to my friends, as I walk across the living room and carefully open the entryway door. I go to turn on the light switch, and remember that the bulb needed to be replaced. So I kneel down and start to feel around for the doorknob. I fumble around in the dark for a few minutes. At this point, I think that the knob has rolled down the hall or something, and I need a flashlight. So I get up and walk back into the living room, explaining to my friends what I am doing, and walk into the kitchen. When I walk into the kitchen, the miscellaneous stuff drawer is open, and right next to the flashlight is the doorknob. I explained to my friends what just happened. Needless to say, we collectively freaked out and got the hell out of that house. When I was in high school, it was a popular dare to go to the dollhouse. The dollhouse was a little house in the side yard of a normal house in a neighborhood by the school. It was surrounded by lighted angel statues. So many that you couldn't even walk on the grass and had to step onto paving stones arranged into a path. It was insanely well built, like a scaled down version of a normal house. There was even a little air conditioner. The people who owned it never locked it, so you could go right in through the front door. At first, it seemed normal, just small. There was carpeting and a set of stairs leading up to a tiny second story. The air felt stale and quiet. Then you would see them. Dozens of dolls, huge, all posed on small couches, standing at tiny tables, a meter tall and frozen, as though you just caught them doing something they shouldn't have. It was creepy as hell, and even after seeing that weird stuff, you still had to walk back out past all the angel statues. Maybe the owners built it for their grandkids or something. It was grade 11, and I had just moved to a new town. I quickly became attracted to this one girl. We got paired up to be partners in our food and fabrics class. So I was doing whatever it took to get a date with her. My family didn't have a sewing machine, so we would do the projects at her house. Upon these visits, I began to question how badly I liked this girl. She lived in a wood cabin, and her father seemed insane. The guy was a hardcore hunter. The walls were lined with animal skulls, bearskin rugs, and antlers all over. He would always have his shirt off, drinking a Budweiser, chewing tobacco, carrying a shotgun. He never spoke a word to me. By this time I befriended a guy named Neil, who noticed that I had a thing for her. He asked me if I'd heard about her parents, then proceeded to tell me that her dad killed her mom and got off on the charges from lack of proof, and his daughter had to live with him because he was her last living relative. The story made no sense, and I wasn't about to believe it, but it definitely rattled me. But there was no way that I was gonna bring it up to her. A little time passes, and I ask her out. I go to her place to pick her up, and she's gorgeous. Her dad makes a comment about, "You know what'll happen to you if you touch her." And suddenly, Neil's story is the only thing I can think about. We went skating, then to a movie, but I was terrified the whole time. I just couldn't get the thought out of my head that her dad was going to kill me when we got back. So after a subpar date, I start the long drive back to her place. We get to the end of her driveway, and she gets me to park and turn off the lights. She wants a kiss. At this point, I forget her dad. I lean over, and we make out. We stop, and I turn the lights back on. There's blood in the snow at the end of the driveway. I wanted to say something, but didn't want to sound like a coward. Her dad was a hunter, right? I'm sure there's a logical explanation. I start the winding drive down her driveway. The trail of blood seems to be getting thicker, and I'm getting more anxious. She still says nothing as she's fixing her hair in her mirror. I keep driving. More blood. I turn the last corner of her driveway and see my headlights shift from the trees to her father, standing in the middle of the driveway. covered in blood, blood all around him, huge knife in hand, and what appeared to be a naked human body lying at his feet. I start hyperventilating. I piss my pants. Her dad takes me to the hospital. Turns out, I have had mild asthma for my entire life and had a panic attack. The dad found a bear at the end of the driveway, shot it, drug it down the driveway, and skinned it before we got back. Anyways, that was over 3 years ago, and I'm still with her. Her dad calls me a coward all the time, except we've gone on hunting trips together, and I'm pretty sure he's a fan. Neil was a jealous ex, her parents split up, and her mom's pretty awesome too. When I was about 14, I was walking on the sidewalk when I passed an old man dressed in what looked like monk robes. Although they didn't seem to belong to any religion that I knew, like Buddhist or Taoist monks. As I passed him, he suddenly tapped me and said, "Tell you the future?" I instinctively dismissed him and said, "No thanks." But right as I took a step to walk off, he grabbed my forearm really hard and yanked me back, and started getting agitated, shouting, "Big disaster coming for you. Big disaster coming for you." I'm not shaken by it anymore, and in all likelihood, it may have been a crazy person, but I still recall the incident from time to time and get confused all over again. Was visiting my parents with my husband. They live in the countryside. Me and my husband decided to go for a walk at night, look at the stars and all that. It's maybe 11 p.m., so we walk for a bit, reach the top of a big hill, and lean on a gate looking over a field. Pretty stars, moon out, no torches. We're there for maybe 5 minutes, when I spot a man walking slowly across the field towards us. The guy doesn't have a torch, which seems super weird to me. We didn't bring one, but we're walking along the roads, and there's a bit of light from the moon. The only reason a man would be walking in the field would be if he was out checking his livestock, which you would definitely need a torch for. He's just slowly walking straight across the field at us, and I can't think of any reason for him to be there. I asked my husband, "Do you see that guy?" He says, "Yes." I say, "What's he doing?" My husband says, "I don't know." He then shouts hello and waves at the guy. Nothing, doesn't slow down, doesn't wave, doesn't say anything, just keeps walking straight towards us. Husband shouts hello again, no response again. At this point, I'm terrified, and assuming this dude is a lunatic, and we need to run. And then the guy turns slightly to the side. Turns out, at a distance, in the dark, the shape of a horse walking directly towards you looks exactly like the outline of a person. In college, I was roommates with my childhood best friend for about 2 years. We are very trusting with each other. We would go into each other's rooms freely and grab whatever we needed, to borrow clothes, hairbrush, perfume, whatever. No questions asked, just a knock if we were in the room to let each other know we were going in. Our rooms are across the hall from each other, with the hall facing the kitchen. So from the kitchen, you could see down the hall where our rooms were. At the time, my friend had very long black hair, and she's very fair-skinned. One day, get home from work, with my headphones in my ear, talking to my mom about my day. I go in the kitchen and grab a snack. I see her walk out of her room and go into mine, leave my room and go back into hers. She looked like she just got out the shower. Her hair was soaking wet, and she was wrapped in a white towel. Her long, black, wet hair is what I distinctly remember. Also, she made no eye contact with me, but I didn't think it was weird. I didn't say anything to her either, since borrowing each other's stuff was normal. I'm still on the phone with my mom, so I don't think much of it. I grab my snack, hang up on my mom, and go into my room to watch TV. I figured she's getting ready to go somewhere, and we'll talk later. About an hour passes, and I go to the kitchen to clean the plate I ate on. I see her in the kitchen making something to eat, and I tell her, "Hey, what did you grab from my room earlier? Did you find what you needed?" She looks at me like if I was crazy, and says, "What are you talking about?" So I say, "Yeah, earlier when I got home, saw you go into my room and grab something. Did you get what you needed?" "Sorry I didn't say hi. I was on the phone with mom." She asks me if I'm sure I saw her. I said yes, 100%. She tells me to grab my phone and go to her car. That she needs to show me something. I had my phone on me, and she grabbed my keys from the kitchen counter, along with her purse, and she drags me out the front door and into her car. She then tells me she got home maybe 5 minutes before we started talking. She had spent the night at her boyfriend's and hadn't been home all day, so she has no idea who I saw. I'll never forget the look on her face when she told me this. Complete fear and panic. She called the cops, and they came along with the apartment manager. They checked the whole apartment and found no one. Nothing amiss, and they were in there a while, checking every nook and cranny. The manager got maintenance to change our locks, and gave us new keys that day. My friend then tells me that for a week she'd been hearing noises from her bathroom, like bottles moving, and every time she went to check she found nothing. I have no idea who I saw going in and out of our rooms, but it looked exactly like her. I don't drink or do drugs. Not on meds. This was in 2014, and I still freak out when I think about it. This past September, my family and I went on vacation to a small island in North Carolina. We had visited and stayed on this island many times throughout my childhood and teen years, so I was very familiar with it and was excited to be back after having not been there for over a decade. One night, my family and I were hanging out on the back porch, having some drinks, and talking late into the night. Just as everyone was cleaning up and getting ready to head to bed, I happened to walk outside and noticed how incredible the stars were. I live in the suburbs outside of a big city, so I can see about 20 stars on a good night, but the entire sky here was filled with stars. I called to my sister, and we both stood in awe as everyone else went to bed. That's when we both decided we wanted to hop on our bikes and go for a late night ride. I'm 28, and my sister is 36, but something about creeping out of the house, without telling anyone, made us both feel like teenagers again. We rode off down the island, laughing and looking up at the stars, before deciding to stop at the opposite end of the island, and just enjoy the view and talk for a while. It was empty and quiet on the island as it was almost 4 a.m. We hadn't seen any other person this entire time. We finally decide to start biking back, and we're not really talking much anymore as we focus on heading back. We start rounding a bend, getting closer to our house, when I see up ahead, the only streetlight on the road, a man standing by himself on the side of the road. Before I can even understand what I'm seeing, he starts walking towards the middle of the road and stops dead center in the street, staring at us as we approach. My sister is a little bit ahead of me, so I try to warn her without being too loud, but she just responds with, "I don't see anyone." I'm watching her, and I bike closer, and I feel my heart racing, so I repeat myself again to my sister. She still doesn't process that I'm scared, so I yell at her, and she finally stops. We're about 20 feet away from the guy now, and I'm saying to my sister that I'm freaked out by this guy in the middle of the street up ahead, and I don't know what to do. And that's when I see him slowly walk back towards the edge of the street again and disappear out of view. In a panic, I make the quick decision to just pedal for my life past this guy and get home. As I'm going past the spot in the road where he was, I look over and I don't see anyone at all. I still have no idea where he could have gone. We made it home safe, and it's been a funny story to tell people, but I still have no clue what that guy was doing, or what his intentions were on this empty island at 4 in the morning. I was babysitting and the kids were asleep upstairs. The only lights on in the house were 3 table lamps in the living room, where I was doing homework. The phone rang. This is the 80s, so I answer the landline. I hear a dial tone, but the phone keeps ringing even after I answer it. I fiddle with the phone and it eventually stops ringing, but still has the dial tone. This happens twice. I keep doing homework. All at once, all 3 table lamps turn off. They won't turn back on. There is no overhead light in that room. Now, the house is completely dark. Then, a huge noise comes from the far side of the house. It sounded like they had a captive wild animal. I bounded up the stairs and turned on the hallway light. I sat in the hallway outside the kids' bedrooms until the parents came home. I was too scared to go into the kitchen and use the one phone to call someone. The parents explained everything when they returned. They had a dual-line phone. There was a tiny switch on the side of the phone. If I had flipped it, I would have been able to answer the line that was ringing. All the table lamps in the living room were on timers, so they would get turned off in the evening to save electricity. The noise was their hot water radiator heating system. Apparently the pipes make that sound when the system turns itself on. I suggested they tell future babysitters about these things. I was part of a small drum corps in Texas back in 2006. We were on tour and got around in 3 15-passenger vans. This was before Google Maps. Our driver had a set of directions from MapQuest. One night, we were on a small 2-lane highway in central Texas. Next thing we know, we're no longer on a highway. We're on a dirt road, and the driver isn't sure how he got there in the first place. We end up pulling into a trailer town. It is very dark. The town, if you could call it that, was a couple square blocks of trailers and campers, and one brick, 2-story building that looks like a convenience store. There's only one light on, and it's the mosquito control light inside the brick building. We start noticing eyes looking at us in every direction. Glowing red and orange. Hundreds of pairs of eyes. We are genuinely freaked out. Driver pops on the high beams, and we realize the entire town is covered in live deer. I mean, hundreds of deer. They're on top of cars, on top of campers, in yards, on the side streets, and lining the side of the dirt road we were on, and not a single one moved. Not an ear wiggle, not a ground scratch, nothing. They just stared at us. The only time they moved was to turn their heads, to keep looking at our vans as we slowly, very slowly, drove past. There were no people, no other lights aside from that mosquito trap and our headlights. Despite deer being on top of trailers and in truck beds and on top of sedans, not a single person was awake in this trailer park. I still think about that night. I thought I dreamed it, but friends from back then remember this night. We used to joke that the deer were actually the residents of the town, and at night, they transform into deer. It felt uncanny, unreal. Never seen anything close to that again. We drove through just fine and ended up back in civilization, but we could never explain what we saw, or why there were so many deer in this trailer park.